1 year, that's all it takes for a country to feel different. Not because the headlines got louder, but because the rules underneath the headlines started to shift. And before we start, a quick note. This video is commentary and analysis. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to lay out what was said, what was debated, and why it mattered, based on widely reported public information. Now here's the real question. After 1 full year of Donald Trump back in the White House, what actually changed? Because if you only follow the daily drama, you miss the deeper story. The deeper story is not a single quote or a single scandal or a single fight. It's the pattern. And the pattern begins with something people don't talk about enough. In modern politics, anniversaries aren't celebrations anymore. They're battlefields. A 1 year recap sounds simple. Promises made, promises kept. But in this era, the 1 year moment becomes a war over reality itself. Because whoever controls the story of year one shapes the expectations of year two. So let's break it down with one structure: claim, context, consequence. First, the claims. In his year one messaging, Trump framed the year as proof of strength, proof that the system could be pushed harder, proof that conflict is not a side effect, it's the engine. Supporters hear that and think, finally someone willing to fight. Critics hear that and think, this is how institutions bend. And here's the untold part. The performance isn't just for the public. It's for everyone watching behind the scenes: lawmakers, agencies, courts, allies, and rivals. They're all listening for the same thing. How far is he willing to go? And what's the cost if he does? That leads to the second layer: power. Every president uses executive power. That's normal. The question is how aggressively, how consistently, and how comfortable the system becomes with it. Because power isn't only what you do, it's how you do it. Sometimes the biggest shift in government isn't a single policy. It's a structural change. Who gets authority? Who controls the process? Who can act quickly without waiting? And when structure changes, allies notice. Not just because they care about politics, but because structure signals predictability or unpredictability. This is why the international reaction during the year wasn't only about outcomes. It was also about the shape of American decision-making. And here's another quiet indicator most people ignore: stability inside the administration itself. If the team is steady, the strategy tends to be steady. If people rotate fast, the strategy can swing quickly. And when the strategy swings quickly, the country feels it, sometimes before it even knows why. Now let's talk about the public mood. A presidency is partly policy, but it's also emotion. How safe people feel, how expensive life feels, how angry people feel when they scroll, how exhausted people feel when they can't even talk to family without politics turning into a fight. 1 year in, America didn't feel like it reached a calm conclusion. It felt like it settled into a new phase of the same argument. And this is the second untold truth. In a divided era, presidents don't just govern. They govern inside a permanent trial. Every decision is evidence for one side. Every decision is a warning to the other. And the verdict is always not yet. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting. Because politics isn't only what happens in Washington. It's what happens in kitchens, in paychecks, and in the invisible math people do every week. If prices feel high, nobody cares about speeches. If rent feels impossible, nobody cares about wins. And if people feel like the future is shrinking, they don't ask who's right, they ask who's to blame. That's why year one isn't judged only by legislation. It's judged by a feeling. Do things feel under control or out of control? And in a country this polarized, the same statistic can produce two opposite emotions. One side says, we're back. The other side says, we're sliding. Same country, different realities. Now let's talk about the part that rarely gets said out loud. The border and immigration aren't just policy issues anymore. They're identity triggers. When leaders speak about immigration, they're not only speaking about laws, they're signaling what kind of country this is supposed to be. So every change, real or proposed, creates a second wave, a cultural reaction. And that's why these debates don't cool down. They don't cool down because they're no longer just debates about rules. They're debates about belonging. Year one amplified that dynamic. Action, reaction, protest, counter-protest, and a media cycle that turns every development into a referendum on who Americans are. Now add one more layer. The courts. A modern presidency doesn't end in the Oval Office. It ends in courtrooms. That's not a slogan. It's a reality. Executive decisions get challenged. Agencies get sued. Judges block, pause, allow, reverse. So if you're trying to understand year one, ask this. How often did governing turn into litigation? How often did policy become a legal chess match? Because when a presidency is constantly filtered through courts, the timeline of power changes. Everything slows down in one place and accelerates somewhere else. And that creates a strange kind of tension. The public thinks they're watching politics, but the real fight is often happening in legal language, inside documents most people will never read. Now we move to the global stage, the moment that makes year one feel bigger than America. There's a difference between domestic politics and global perception. On global stages, leaders aren't judged only by what they announce, they're judged by what they imply. Allies don't just listen to words, they read signals, tone, pressure, demands. And the question underneath it all is simple. Can we rely on this version of America, or do we need a backup plan? That's why major international appearances matter so much. Not because of applause, but because of what happens after the cameras turn off. Diplomats adjust, markets react, countries hedge, and rivals test boundaries. Now the communication style. A modern presidency lives and dies by short moments, a line, a joke, a jab, a viral clip. And 1 year into this term, the cycle is clear. A punchy line lands first. A correction or context comes second. Then the real fight begins. Not about the original topic, but about trust. Who do you believe? The leader you like? Or the experts you don't trust? Or the media you think is biased? Or the influencers who edit everything for maximum outrage? Politics has become a loop. Emotion first, explanation second. And this is where the untold media shift matters. People don't share facts, they share feelings. A fact that supports your tribe becomes truth. A fact that challenges your tribe becomes propaganda. So the battlefield isn't only the government, it's your timeline. It's the group chat, it's the comment section. And once politics becomes identity, compromise feels like betrayal. That's why the temperature stays high. Now let's compress the year into the big three changes. What actually shifted? Change number one, the pace of narrative control. Trump doesn't just govern, he narrates. Constantly. Everything becomes a story of conflict and victory. Even the one-year moment becomes part of the campaign-like rhythm of keeping attention and keeping pressure. Change number two, the fact-check economy. In this era, major claims are immediately dissected. Not days later, not weeks later, immediately. That tells you something important. Truth itself has become part of the governing battlefield. Not just policies, not just outcomes, but what people accept as real. Change number three, allies reacting to structure, not just policy. And this is subtle but huge. International partners aren't only watching what the U.S. does, they're watching how decisions get made, how consistent the system feels, and how concentrated authority appears. Because structure predicts behavior, and behavior predicts risk. So that's why year one didn't feel like a normal political chapter. It felt like a rehearsal, a test run for how the rest of the term will feel. Which brings us to the final question. What will year two answer? Here's the final untold truth. Year one is the easiest year to define because it has a clean beginning and a clean end. Year two is harder. That's where consequences catch up. That's where the emotional impact becomes physical. Prices, jobs, borders, wars, alliances, court decisions, political fatigue. Year two is where people stop reacting to headlines and start reacting to life. And if year one was about power and perception, Year two will be about whether any of it holds. So now I want to ask you, what do you think was the single biggest change in Trump's first year back in office? If you want a part two, I'll cover the three pressure points most likely to define the next 12 months, and which narratives are most likely to dominate the road ahead. Subscribe for more documentary-style breakdowns, and write your take in the comments.